Hello and welcome to the B Corp Brand Awareness webinar. My name is Julia Gottwald and I'm the Associate Director of Marketing Operations here at B Lab U.S. in Canada. I oversee our team that runs our brand channels and campaigns, and I also work on our brand strategy a little bit. And I am joined by my colleague, Brianna Humes, who you'll hear from towards the end of our time together. We organized this webinar together for y'all today. Brianna is our brand marketing and partnerships manager, and she leads our marketing campaigns like B Corp Month, which hopefully you all are very familiar with. Before we start, we feel it's important to begin meetings with a land acknowledgement statement. This is our way of recognizing the Indigenous peoples whose land was stolen and who remain in our communities today. With this in mind, I'd like to share that I'm calling in today from the unceded and ancestral lands of the Ute, Arapaho, and Cheyenne peoples, also known as Denver, Colorado. If you're curious about which lands you're residing on, feel free to use this link, whos.land, and we will also paste it in the chat. So for some context for the agenda today, it's going to be packed. And so I'm going to do a very brief context setting and then do speaker introductions up front. We'll dive into the 2023 Brand Awareness Survey results with Emily from Fors Marsh. Then we'll move into a presentation by Laurie at the Hartman Group about the broader consumer sustainability landscape. And then Jess at BBMG will round us out with an example of B Corp sustainability marketing in action. After the presentations from our speakers, we will move into a couple questions that we'll answer live. And then Brianna is going to share a poll so you all can give input about what you're interested in as it relates to brand awareness and brand marketing and communications, as we want to hear from you about possibly doing something similar to this in the fall. And then we'll be rounded out with a few ways to engage after this. So Brianna will also fill us in on a couple of events coming up and anything to keep an eye out for going forward. And then just a note, please feel free to use the webinar Q&A function, and speakers and B Lab staff can respond throughout the call. We do have a tight schedule, so we will select a few questions to be answered live at the end of the call if we do have time. If there are still any lingering questions, we can answer via email in a follow-up email, and I'll also share on the Beehive along with the recording and then some slides from this presentation. All right, so why are we here today? Well, our objective is to grow the B Corp movement in the US and Canada by turning our community and values-aligned audiences into brand advocates. As y'all know, brand awareness is an essential piece of this objective. For us, this objective comes to life through equipping B Corps with brand building tools, campaigns, and educational opportunities, as well as finding ways to work together towards this common goal. This also includes our own marketing channels and using those to tell B Corp stories and using paid and earned media opportunities to increase awareness. And finally, in partnership with Fors Marsh, we have started regularly tracking our brand awareness stats and key related consumer indicators annually. All right, let's introduce our three speakers today. First, you'll hear from Emily Nadel. She is a senior researcher with Fors Marsh. For the last 2 years, she has supported B Lab's work on understanding consumers' awareness and perception of the B Corp certification. Laurie Demeritt is who you'll hear from after Emily. She is the CEO of the Hartman Group, a consultancy focused on identifying demand-side trends in the food and beverage industry. Laurie drives a vision and strategy and operations and oversees client projects focused on portfolio management, brand renovation, consumer insights, and innovation. And then finally, we'll hear from Jess Pitera. Jess is a creative director and designer and currently head of creative at BBMG. And BBMG is a brand and social impact consultancy based in Brooklyn and also a founding B Corp. So thank you to all three of our speakers. And without further ado, I will hand it over to Emily to talk about our 2023 Brand Awareness Survey insights. Yes.
Okay. So yes, as Julia mentioned, my name is Emily Nadel, and I'm a senior researcher with Fors Marsh. Today, I'm going to be sharing some of the insights and findings of the 2023 B Lab Association study. This 2023 survey is the third iteration of the B Lab Association study. It's a survey that's administered by Fors Marsh on behalf of B Lab to understand awareness and perceptions of B Corp certification. and brand elements among both consumers and job seekers. The objective of the survey was to provide B Lab with information about brand awareness and perceptions of the B Corp certification. And to do so, we used a web-based survey of US and Canadian individuals who are drawn from a pool of panel members. All data are weighted to be generalizable to the population. The survey fielded for just over 1 week. It launched on August 22nd, 2023, and it closed on September 1st. There were 4 sections to the survey. So we had awareness and appeal certifications, psychographics, impact of certification, and demographics. For awareness and appeal, we asked about overall certification awareness, B Corp knowledge, certification trust and rigor, and B Corp favorability. For psychographics, we asked about motivators when purchasing products, the importance of social issues, actions in support of social issues, job-seeking preferences, and the purchasing of B Corp products. Before the 3rd section, we showed respondents a description of the B Corp certification, and then we asked respondents about perceptions and interest in B Corps, motivators and barriers to job seekers and consumers, and perceptions of certifications. And then finally, we ended on demographics, which included items such as political affiliation, household composition, income, and race and ethnicity. So before jumping into the results of this year's survey, I'd like to address why we will not be comparing results from this brief to previous years. First, we've changed how we conceptualize awareness. In prior years, we calculated awareness by aggregating those who are aware of the B Corp name, those who recognize the B Corp logo, and those who recognized B Corp slogans. For this year, we removed slogan recognition and only included name and logo recognition. In addition, this is the first year that the survey was administered in line with the B Lab Global Brand Awareness Manual, which had a few minor changes from previous years. These changes were made with the goal of increasing consistency across the global network to ensure our questions and question positions are standardized across surveys. But these minor changes did lead to an increase in awareness driven by higher name recall. Again, in order to increase consistency across the global network, we have results that are comparable across studies. We created a manual. This slide outlines the general guidance from the manual. So here we have a standardized set of questions, including B Corp awareness measures, and these questions are to be asked at the beginning of all surveys. The manual also prioritizes name recall as a key item of interest. So it's made a standalone question to reduce any possible bias. This question is to be asked whether participants have heard of a B Corp or B Corp certification. And then finally, logo recall is to be asked in a list of relevant certifications. Prior to 2023, name recall was asked mid-survey as a mark all that apply. Specifically, we asked, which of the following certifications, if any, are you aware of? Please select all that apply, with a list of about 10 other certifications. Then logo recall was a standalone question, asking if respondents have seen the logo before. In 2023, all recall items were brought to the front of the survey. Name recall also became a standalone question, while logo was asked as part of a mark all apply question, with other certification logos being shown alongside it. So part of what we believe is driving an increase of awareness in 2023 compared to previous years is a slight variation in how name recall is asked. So prior to 2023, we asked respondents whether they were aware of a B Corp. And in 2023, we asked if participants have heard of B Corp. Though they're both valid measures, aware of may be perceived as a higher bar than heard of for participants. And for this reason, we may be seeing that increase. And so yes, for these reasons, we chose not to compare across years and will only focus on results from 2023 in this brief. The results I'm presenting will be broken out into 2 sections. The first section will focus on overall awareness and associations, and the second section will examine the results through a generational lens. In this section, I'll be focusing on the overall results, which are an aggregate of both US and Canadian participants. Although the results were generally similar across countries, I'll highlight a few spots where the countries do differ. When looking at perceptions of certification generally, we see that most adults find certifications to be helpful when making decisions about businesses, such as where to buy from and who to work for. However, about a quarter of adults are skeptical of certifications, believing they deceive consumers, and about half of adults check to see if the information about a certified product is true. Jumping into measures specific to B Corp, we see that just over 1/3 of adults in both the US and Canada report being aware of B Corp certification. This awareness is primarily driven by name recognition. And of those who are aware of the B Corp certification, they most often recall seeing the name or logo on a product. Most adults aware of the B Corp certification report being at least somewhat knowledgeable. However, knowledge is still limited, with just 1 in 5 reporting being extremely knowledgeable, suggesting this may be an area to focus on. We see that respondents tend to associate B Corp certification with the evaluation of environmental practices more often than social practices. And then perhaps mirroring cultural differences between the US and Canada. Adults in Canada were more likely to associate their certification with the evaluation of social practices, while adults in the US are more likely to associate it with the evaluation of profitability. Most adults aware of B Corp certification believe it's making a positive impact. Thinking about how awareness impacts consumer behaviors, we see that just over 1 in 3 adults trust B Corp, recommend a product because they have recommended a product because if it's B Corp certification. Jumping into trust and rigor, generally we see that adults trust and believe in the rigor of B Corp certification. Most adults have at least some trust in the B Corp certification and believe it's at least somewhat rigorous. When looking at a broader population than just those who are already aware of B Corp certification, we see that over half of adults indicate they'd be interested in purchasing from a certified B Corp company after being shown a description of it. When looking towards job seekers, we see that many adults report being interested in working for a B Corp certification or B Corp certified company after learning about the certification. When considering why consumers may be interested in purchasing from a B Corp, we see that consumers generally want to make a difference, and they want to purchase goods and services that are better for the environment and for society. However, individuals also report concerns that could prevent them from purchasing from a B Corp. Although some respondents report skepticism, they most often are concerned that certified products will be more expensive. So that wraps up our overall findings. In this next section, I'm going to be covering generational differences. Here we're comparing 4 generations. So we're looking at Generation Z, those who are 18 to 27, Millennials, those who are 28 through 43, Generation X, those who are 44 through 59, and Baby Boomers. And those are those who are 60 and older. I just want to note that Generation Z technically also includes individuals currently under the age of 18, but our study specifically only captures adults. So we only look at those who are 18 and older. Looking at consumer values, we see that individuals prioritize a range of social and environmental issues. Some issues that stand out across all generations include things like access to healthcare, workers' rights, and voting rights. However, younger generations feel particularly strong about environmental and social issues. Younger generations are more likely to report that sustainability is important to them. They're also more likely to be concerned with issues related to diversity, inclusion, and income inequality. Across the board, we see that individuals believe that businesses have not only the responsibility to take stances on environmental issues, but they also have the responsibility to act on those stances and advocate for environmental sustainability. On the other hand, we see that younger generations, they take a stronger stance on social issues, mirroring their strong social values. Younger generations are more likely to believe both that businesses should take stances on social and political issues and that businesses have the responsibility to advocate for social change. When we get into more specific perceptions of certifications, we see a more complicated relationship between certifications and the generations. Generally, most adults believe certifications help them to make decisions about businesses, but younger generations are more likely to view certifications with skepticism. Although they're more likely than older generations to believe that certified companies are those that are truly ethical, they don't necessarily take certifications at face value. More than 1/3 of younger generations believe that certified products generally deceive consumers, and most adults from younger generations are sure to check that information about a certified product is true. Looking at B Corp certification specifically, we see that younger generations are more likely to be aware of the certification and to act based on that knowledge. Compared to older generations, younger generations are more likely to recall having purchased from B Corps themselves, as well as to have recommended a product because of this B Corp certification. Trust in the B Corp certification and belief in the certification's rigor is high across all generations. Notably, although younger generations aware of the B Corp certification are more likely to act on their knowledge of certification, they are not more likely to view it as trustworthy or rigorous compared to older generations. And I think this may reflect their more skeptical view of certifications generally. And we also see that knowledge remains a challenge across all generations. So regardless of generation, we see that most individuals aware of the certification only view themselves as somewhat knowledgeable about the certification. After being shown a description of the B Corp certification, most adults indicate that they'd be interested in purchasing from a certified B Corp, and many adults also express interest in working for a B Corp. But consistent with other findings, we see that knowledge of the B Corp certification has a larger impact on those younger generations. And specifically, younger generations were more likely to report that they were interested in purchasing from a B Corp and that they'd be interested in working for one. However, I think it's also important to note that older generations may be at the point of either leaving the workforce or preparing to leave the workforce, which could possibly deflate their interest in working for a B Corp. Now I'll move into our overall takeaways and what these results mean for the B Corp community. First, we find that value alignment is a powerful force. That is, consumers have strongly held values and believe organizations have a responsibility to take action on environmental and social issues. This is a particularly powerful force when we look at the younger generations that are stepping up to hold businesses to a higher standard, and they expect them to enact change. Next, we see trust and rigor are a shared foundation. So trust in institutions has been waning in recent years. This is true when we think of government institutions, such as the Supreme Court and the military, as well as other institutions, such as banks and newspapers. However, we still find that B Corp certification is being viewed as a trustworthy and rigorous certification. Next, we need to build awareness as one community. We would encourage the B Corp community to share their B Corp story to customers, suppliers, the community, and general public. We also encourage displaying the B Corp logo on packaging to increase the visibility of the certification. This is a particularly valuable tool in spreading awareness, as this is where most consumers are learning about the certification. And then finally, knowledge is key. This means we need to build foundational knowledge of the B Corp certification. In particular, there should be a focus on increasing transparency and communicating standards and regulations for B Corp certified companies. This, again, is particularly important for younger generations who really strive to consume in ethical ways, but also report skepticism of certifications. For these individuals, it's incredibly important to increase their confidence in what they're consuming. And that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Emily. And now I'll pass it to Laurie at the Hartman Group.
Great. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are calling in from. Very happy to be a part of the webinar today and looking forward to sharing some of our materials. I'm hoping everyone now can see my slide. Julie, can you give me a thumbs up?
Yes.
Great,
Good.
thank you. We are a consumer market research and consulting organization, and we've been doing work in the social justice and the environmental space around topics like sustainability and health and wellness for over 30 years now. And so what I wanted to share is some of our consumer research, which was fielded in the fall of last year, 2023, around some of the issues that I think many of you hold dear to your hearts in the space of social responsibility, environmental wellness, and importantly, how that resonates with your clients, with consumers, with third parties, because we know that we are hoping to get value from B Corp in the same way that we know it's the right thing to do. So I wanted to share this information with you. This is done with a large sample of consumers, over 2,000 consumers. It is representative of the U.S. population. I'll show you some of the demographic skews, which align really nicely with what Emily was just sharing with you. And then we also do a large body of qualitative work where we get into the homes of consumers and talk to them about these issues. So I have a few quotes to share with you as well. So just off the top here, what I wanted to share was what is the level of concern amongst consumers today, and has it been growing? I think there was a fear amongst a lot of folks in the overall marketplace that given COVID, there might be different priorities coming out of that. And that sort of surge of interest in social and environmental well-being may have been put on the back burner. And although we did see that in the early days of COVID, what we've now seen is it very strongly being back on the trajectory that we saw prior to the pandemic, which is that consumers are becoming increasingly knowledgeable and increasingly concerned about many of these issues. So what this is showing is a number of consumers who say they have become more concerned, less concerned, or have no change in how they think about the environment and social well-being. And what you'll see here, the numbers there from 2023, but we also have the +5 and the -3, which are comparing those numbers to 2021, so we can get a sense of what direction things are headed in. One thing that was very clear when we did this research, and it was, again, the fall of last year, is that there was a really substantial impact from the weather that people saw last year. And that seems a little silly, but it was just across the board, no matter who we spoke to, no matter what their demographic background was, their political persuasion, consumers said things like, there's something weird going on with the weather, and I think it's been caused by humans. And so not all consumers would use a word or a phrase like climate change, but that idea that something was happening to our environment that we were causing was pervasive. And you see that in the quote here on the top right. And reflected in the fact that we now see over half of consumers, and also a 5-point increase in just 2 years, who say that they've become more concerned about the environment. And we think that is due in many ways to just what they see happening around them. And it's something they actually can make tangible now rather than something that's sort of amorphous or just talked about in academic circles. Social well-being, which clearly grew quite a bit in terms of consumer concern early in the pandemic, when we saw a lot of movements and a lot of engagement from consumers in the social justice movement in particular. And although we didn't see a statistically significant change from 2021 to 2023, what you see here still are a fairly strong number of consumers at 39% who say they're becoming more concerned about this. And I will say that although consumers aren't particularly sophisticated yet about linking some of the environmental change to social justice issues, we're starting to see that, as you can see in the lower right here in the quote. And so this idea of not just social well-being, which in the past to consumers has meant do no harm to your workers, do no harm to your communities, is now becoming more kind of a proactive, what they're wanting for is a proactive stance from companies to actually undertake change. So it's not just not doing bad, but actually doing good. And I think that's where something like B Corp plays a role. It's no longer now companies or organizations who are making these claims about not harming anyone. It's actually saying we are proactively trying to do good in the marketplace today and for consumers. And so I think we're likely to see social well-being continue to grow in the next year or two as a key consumer concern. Now, this is a few numbers here that we've been tracking for quite a while, back to 2007. The line you can see at the top there are the number of consumers who say they are familiar with the term sustainability. And not surprisingly, that has seen a lot of growth during that time, a full 33-point increase from 2007 to 2023. So even though we know, as I'll share in just a moment, sustainability as a topic area can mean different things to different consumers, that sense that they know what it is, that they can sort of articulate it in some sense, has grown substantially. But what's interesting, if you look at those two bottom numbers, is there has not been a lot of change in the number of consumers who say they can identify a sustainable product or can identify a sustainable company. And so there's been this real gap, a growing gap, in fact, in terms of that difference between familiarity and then the ability to actually pinpoint products in the marketplace. So despite all the sort of work that maybe individual companies have tried to do for their brand, their product, their reputation, we're not necessarily seeing that in the marketplace. Now, again, to us as researchers, this is really a huge opportunity. And I think for an organization and a certification like B Corp, this can really be a rallying cry, right? Because B Corp is a way to help close that gap so consumers don't have to do all this work to figure out what products or what companies do they want to pursue because of the values those companies have or the morals they have. They can use B Corp as sort of that shortcut to help understand what's right for them because they don't want to have to do all the due diligence. So I think despite maybe at first glance this seeming a little bit depressing, we actually see it as a really important and optimistic opportunity to help consumers in the marketplace, no matter what you're selling, a product, a service, an idea, close that gap as they can understand the sort of items they want to buy from organizations that hold similar values. Now, I'm using the word sustainability here because that's a word that consumers have started to resonate with. And I know for many of you, you might use different ways to describe your actions, your activities, your products, but really that's just a sort of shorthand right now for these ideas that are floating around. What this is showing off the right is the meaning of sustainability to consumers. This was obviously in a quantitative study, but we got all of the input for it from the qualitative research we've been doing over the years. So hearing how consumers talk about this topic area and then wanting to put numbers against it. So a few things I want to point out here. The first, if you look off to the left, that bottom paragraph, the number of terms that consumers are using and associating with sustainability has gone from 5.2 in 2017 to 6.1 in 2023. So right off the bat, just this idea of sustainability is becoming more and more meaningful and having more definitions in consumers' minds. And as you look to the right, you can really start to see that in terms of all the things on this list, right? There's a lot there. And as you look to the top of the list, you have sort of these, I guess I'd call them historical or sort of book definitions of sustainability, reducing waste, being environmentally friendly, being responsible. And as you can see in that middle column, that's showing the change between 2021 and 2023. And you can see here that several of those terms have gone up in terms of consumers saying it's part of their definition of sustainability. Importantly, nothing's gone down. So like I said, there's just a layering on of what sustainability means to them. And as you look at this list, the other thing I would note off to the right there are those little boxes, and those are showing terms that are likely to over-index to particular generational cohorts. And so if you look at that blue box, which represents the Gen Z, and the yellow box, which represents millennials, you start to see some interesting patterns where those pop up as you go down this list. So things that might be very much associated with either health or maybe premium cues, right? So you see here all natural, good health, organic, high quality, fair trade, local. And so I think what's so interesting, what's happening today in the food and beverage marketplace, where we do most of our work, is this idea of sustainability is starting to align with the idea of higher quality. And, having been around the block for a long time, I remember when we first started doing work about 25 years ago, if you talked about something like a sustainable product, if it was a food product, many consumers would think, oh, it's not going to taste as good. Maybe it won't be as, texture won't be as good. It was like this juxtaposition between some of these sustainable values and that end product quality. That notion has been totally flipped on its head. Sustainability and cues around it today for most consumers are indicative of higher quality or better. Why? Because they think there's been more intent or care that's gone into the product. And I think if you're a service organization, it's the same idea. If you have gone through the rigor of certification, if you've cared enough to do this, you're probably going to be providing a better quality of service because of all that intentionality that's gone into the certification. So the point here really being sustainability is more meaningful to consumers. It's definitely growing in terms of what it means to them. We might argue that some of these things aren't actually the definition of sustainability, but a consumer perceives them to be. And then importantly, for younger consumers, they really are aligning some of these cues around social and environmental health and responsibility with a better end product. And obviously a better end product to many consumers is something they're willing to pay more for as well. Now, talking about transparency for a minute, and I think this has been a real challenge for many of the clients we work with, who are maybe sort of dipping their toe in the water of undertaking some of these environmental and social values, but they're a little bit nervous about how much they should talk about them in the consumer marketplace. And there's been strong data for the past few years, and you see some here with the 65% showing that consumers really do want to understand what's going on behind the scenes and want those practices to be made more visible. Consumers do not expect companies to be perfect yet in the space. You don't have to be doing everything correctly, but you need to be making progress. They want to see you on a journey. So in the same way that consumers say, they themselves are on a journey to try to maybe make better choices or buy more in alignment with their values, they want to buy from companies that are doing the same thing, whether it's a product, a service, an idea, et cetera. And so being more transparent is critically important. Off to the left here, we wanted to get a sense from consumers, when they saw some of these claims around environmental and social attributes, how would they sort of perceive them? And you see here, relatively small segment and almost equal segments of consumers saying, I don't usually believe them, or I usually believe them. And then the vast majority of people at 60% saying it either is something they can be skeptical about and they want to verify, or it depends on the company, that some companies they're going to be a little more trustworthy of than others. And again, I think this is where the B Corp can really play a role. So for that 60% of people who are sort of on the fence when they might see claims that your organization is making, knowing that there's a certifying body behind it can really be the shortcut for them to understanding and not, again, having to do that due diligence. So rather than the consumer being skeptical and maybe not believing the company or feeling like they've got to do all the work, certifications and B Corp in particular can really help close that gap so that consumers have that sort of indicator that they know it's going to be claims that are true and that they can feel good about buying that product. And then finally, I want to share some information with you. And I know there's a lot of data here, but I'm happy to share this with everyone if you want to look at your leisure later. But I think, again, this idea of certification, which is a really rigorous and stringent certification, I know many of you have undertaken because you believe it's the right thing to do. And it's just part of your value. I commend you for that. I also would note that, there's hopefully some value you can get out of it as well in terms of business value. And that's what we consistently try to uncover when we're doing research with consumers. And so this, again, is in the food and beverage space specifically, but I will say that I think this is useful across all types of organizations because this is really getting at the idea of who and how are people willing to pay for products that have particular attributes. And so what you're seeing here in that middle column there, that list in the middle is showing how many consumers think the thing off to the left is an important consideration. That ranges from about 15% to 40%. And then among those people who think it's an important consideration, are they willing to pay more for it, either a little or a lot more? And you can see that off to the right. And so I think the takeaway here being, for those consumers that do care about these attributes, there's a very strong sense that they are willing to pay some more for those because they see the value of them, either because the value is just in alignment with their beliefs are, or because they think that value actually gives them a better end quality product. And so a vast array of social well-being and environmental issues here. And I think some of the things that pop in particular for being an important consideration have to do with sort of the social space. So the idea of supporting local communities, supporting farmer livelihoods, providing safe working conditions, having minimal or providing good wages and benefits for the company's workers. And so we do think that is something that really is starting to grow, where we have well over a third of consumers who are saying that's important, and then the vast majority of them willing to pay more for it as well. So taking those numbers in the middle, taking them at the far right, what we're seeing for many of these attributes is a willingness amongst about a quarter to a full third of consumers who claim a willingness to pay more for them. And we're starting to see this increase as consumers start to want to purchase from companies that are in alignment with their values. So I thank you for the time and attention and look forward to some questions if we have time later, and I'll pass things back over to Julia.
Great. Thank you so much, Jess, and for all of our speakers today. It looks like we do have a couple minutes for questions. And so I see there's a couple that have been answered and a couple still open. I think we will jump back to Emily, and I think looks like there was a couple questions related to the brand awareness survey. I know you answered one, and so I'll ask you the question for slide 17. I don't know if you have that ready or want to pull it up again or just voice it over, but is there any insight into whether having a B Corp certification is a proxy for taking a stand on those environmental or social issues, or are they expecting more than just certification? Did we get in, did the research point us in any way for that question?
Yeah, I would say we don't necessarily have data that answers this specifically, but what we do know, and based on some of the skepticism of certifications and what people are looking for, I don't think having a certification is enough. People do want to see actions taken. So I don't think you can rely on a certification for people to assume that you're taking these steps.
Great, thanks, Emily. And then I believe this next one is also for you. So checking to see if the validity of the certification, do you know what their research process includes? I feel like we maybe needed a little bit more context if you remember when this came in.
So for this one, I know there the question, I think this is what it's referring to. There was a question that asked whether people check whether information about a certified product is true. And if that's the case, we don't have necessarily a question that asks, like, what steps did you take to certify this information? Although that would be a good question. But we do have a question that's an open end that asks, what makes a certification rigorous, which I think also gets at this a little bit. And out of those open ends, some things that stand out are people want the standards to be comprehensive. They want them to be transparent. They don't want the certification to be easy to acquire. A lot of individuals worry about gaps in standards where companies essentially can skirt the requirements. They want there to be like frequent reviews and required renewals, which of course is required for B Corp. They also want it to be scientific, non-biased measures. They want it from a non-biased organization. And then one thing that really stood out too is just reputation. Reputation really matters. People just believe that if a certification is more well-known, that means it's more rigorous.
Great. And then since we have time, I'll ask you this question. I know that you answered it, but did questions like on slide 12 about referral of B Corp product focus only on products, or is there data on B Corp service-driven businesses?
Yes. So I would say this survey in particular tends to focus more heavily on products. So that particular question about recommendations did focus specifically on certified products.
Great. And then there is lots of questions about whether the slide and slides will be shared. We'll be sharing the recording. And I think some of the slides will also be shared as well from this webinar. So be on the lookout for that in a follow-up email and on the Beehive. There was another question, when is the next brand awareness webinar? So we do work with Fors Marsh on an annual basis. So a webinar like this is probably going to be an annual event for us. However, this is a good segue into our poll because we're looking to do some sort of next webinar related to this topic. And so I'll pass it over to Brianna. And thank you, Emily, for answering all those questions.
Thanks, Julia. So yeah, we are curious what you all think. We're seeing a ton of engagement in the chat and in the Q&A. And so we want to know what more you want to learn about and talk about as a B Corp community. So our marketing and communications team wanted to launch this poll and see what other kind of topics you're interested in. So we have a few options. We have storytelling and PR, which we know is one that comes up a lot. Case studies are huge demand in our community, so that could be an interesting one. B Corp marketing materials. And then if you have other ideas, please share in the chat. We're going to take a record of those and see what you all are interested in. I'm going to give it some time. We're seeing answers come in. Storytelling and PR for sure. Oh, we said business development among B Corps coming in through the chat as another idea. Awesome. Okay. We have about 75% of people participated. Awesome. Continue to drop your ideas in the chat. This will be really helpful for us for our next webinar. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so if you're interested in engaging with this topic more, I think Julia just mentioned that we have some opportunities to do that. Number one, we'd love for you to stay tuned for future events. That's part of what the poll was for, to sort of gauge what future events we could host that would be interesting for you all. One of the ones that's top of mind for us is doing a media training in small group format and sharing some resources, because we know that has come up quite a bit for the community, just having some talking points and information available for B Corps. And the second one is one that someone asked about in the Q&A function, and I answered. The B Corp Marketers Network is actually hosting an event on May 23rd. That's the perfect follow-up for this. If you're interested in sort of learning or talking more about the insights from this call and how you can apply them to your B Corp, highly recommend joining this event. And then the third one is, if you are a B Corp CPG, please join our new Beehive group. This is a new network that we just launched literally on Monday. We had our very first event, but if you're interested in joining a network of B Corp CPGs or talking about some more brand awareness efforts, I saw a question come through about co-funded advertising campaigns. Highly recommend joining the Beehive group. We're working on the format of that group and the future goals of the network, but it's a great time to join and share feedback with us and get connected with other CPG brands. And then the last thing we would love is if everyone took our survey. We hope that you enjoyed the event, but we're always open and welcome to feedback. So please take the post-event survey. I think it has been dropped in the chat, but also when you leave the webinar, it'll also pop up as like a little Zoom window. So please take some time to take the chat. We'll include it, or take the survey. We'll include it in the follow-up email that we send as well, and share your feedback with us. And I think this is the very end of the webinar. And I should say thank you so much for attending and joining us. And we appreciate your engagement and all your questions.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you to our speakers, Emily, Laurie, and Jess. I hope you'll have a great day. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you in other events. And yes, thank you all.